bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. Now is the time to trim your lamps and get ready for the coming of the Lord. Stay tuned for the Midnight Cry broadcast.
Good morning. Turn, if you will, to a fairly familiar passage in Psalm 73. And this is a psalm of Asaph. That's what the heading says above it. You know, most people associate the Psalms with David, and rightly so, because he certainly wrote a majority of them. And even though there were other authors of many of the Psalms, I think it's fair to say that they were protégés of David and certainly reflected the same spirit. The same anointing was on all of them. But this, that we've often referred to as a Psalm of David, actually was written by a man named Asaph. And I think it's worth setting a background for who this man was. And just to kind of briefly go over some history that kind of sets this up, we know that God established a system of sacrificial worship that was not meant to be an end in itself, but to point to the future. Under Moses, they established a tabernacle where people came to offer sacrifices and to meet with God, to inquire of Him. And this was a tent with an Ark of the Covenant. It was in a tent within a tent within a tent. There was a holy of holies place that the Ark was kept. And that's the way it stayed. The tent moved from place to place all the time they were in the wilderness. That was their signal to move, was when the tabernacle and the cloud moved. And they finally conquered the land and set up a more or less permanent place for the tabernacle. And there it stayed until the days of Eli and Samuel. And you remember what happened there, that Eli, the prophet, became very corrupt and very careless, and his sons became corrupt. And as Samuel began as a prophet of God to be raised up in Israel, he began to be listened to, and everybody knew he was a prophet. But there came a day when they were out in battle against the Philistines. And Hophni and Phinehas, I believe it was, the sons of Eli, these corrupt priests, were very presumptuous. And they decided the thing they needed to do to have God with them was to carry the ark into battle. And so presumptuously, that's what they did. And you remember what happened? The Philistines captured it, didn't they? But you know, God has a way of making Himself known, and God took advantage of this situation to make Himself known in a very special way to the Philistines, that this was not just some religious relic. And so you remember some of the things that happened. I won't go into a lot of detail because that's not the main point, but they set it in their temple, and their god Dagon, they found him bowed down before it in the morning. They set him up again. The next morning, the same thing happened. He was all crumbled and bowed down before the ark. And it stayed there a few months, and the Lord began to plague the people. And finally, they realized, hey, maybe this is because we have this ark. And they talked to their priests, and the priests said, you know, you should have paid attention to what the Lord did, what the God of Israel did to the Egyptians. So let's make a test. We don't know for sure if this is from God or not, but we're going to set up a test. We're going to build a brand new ark, or brand new cart, I should say. Put the ark on it. We're going to put some golden gifts. We're going to take a couple of cows. Now, these weren't just any cows. These were cows that had just had calves. Now, how many of you have ever been around or seen a cow that's just had a calf? Yeah, well, I have. And it certainly is not something you easily separate, is it? Mother from her calf. And so they said, here's a test we're going to make. We're going to put we're going to pin up the calves, and we're going to attach this cart to these cows. Now, if they head out and go straight to Israel, then we'll know, yeah, this has been caused because we took the ark and we offended the God of Israel. If they come back, which would be the natural order of things, they start to get hurting because they're full of milk, and they hear the cry of the calf. That's the natural instinct. If they don't go to Israel and they come back, then we'll know that all this just happened. Well, of course, you know the story. They head straight for Israel, and they got there, and the Israelites recognized it. They got some Levites, and they put it off in the house of a man named Abinadab. And it's interesting that once the ark was separated from the tabernacle of Moses, it never was reunited with the tabernacle of Moses. Never, ever again. But anyway, it stayed there for many years. They consecrated a son of Abinadab named Eleazar, I believe. This is not the Eleazar. There were many Eleazars, but this was a man named Eleazar, and it became his job to guard the ark, take care of it. Well, many years passed, and we come past the reign of Saul, and now David is king. And David gets the bright idea and the right idea that we ought to bring the ark back to Jerusalem. You know, David had in the meantime established, he had captured a fortress that the enemy never said what he would never been able to do, called Zion. And he captured it anyway. God helped him, and that became the capital city of David. The city of David, Zion, a fortress on the hill, which is now Jerusalem. And so it came into his heart, we need to get the ark back to Jerusalem. You know, we sing that song. And so he built a very special tent that he meant for it to reside in. And you remember the story of how they went to the house of Abinadab, and they began to carry this ark back. I'm going to turn just while I'm talking here to 1 Chronicles chapter 16. There's a couple of things here, 15 and 16. Because this has to do with that process. Actually, I think it was earlier in 13 when all this other event happened. But they decided they're going to bring it back, and so he consults all the people, and they don't really consult God very much about it. They set it out. They set it on a cart, and they're all singing and dancing. And there were a couple of men that were assigned to take care of the ark and to kind of guide it as it went along. One of them was Uzzah, and the other one was Ahio. They were actually, I believe, if you look at all the accounts, they were actually grandsons of Abinadab. So these were the sons of this Eleazar who'd been put in charge of the ark. And, you know, there's a kind of a lesson in that. It's awfully easy for second and third generation people to not really get it, to not properly understand and respect the things of God. And one of the things that God meant to teach his people throughout the Old Testament was to put a difference between what is holy and what's sacred and what's common and earthly. And that's why God had a special people who were alone entrusted with the ark, and then very special ways. So here's Uzzah and his brother Ahio, and they're walking along, and to them the ark is just a nice box that their father was assigned to guard. And so they're bopping along. They grew up with it. It was just a common thing to them. And so you know what happened? The oxen stumbled. And what happened? Uzzah put forth his hand to steady it, and God killed him right on the spot. God meant to teach something by this. And so David was upset, and it stopped, and they parked the ark at the house of Obed-Edom for a time until they could figure out what to do. And I think something like 3 months went by, and word reached David that God has blessed the house of Obed-Edom. And so this time he sought the Lord and said, Lord, what's up here? What do we do? And they went back and they discovered how this was all supposed to be done. It's amazing how this knowledge just did not get passed as it should have from generation to generation. But God was reestablishing something here.